I think for everybody, we all know that we've been living through extremely difficult circumstances over the past year or so. And for some of you, that means that your circumstances may have changed, and others, it may mean that you're considering changing direction altogether, hence being on a webinar like this today. As a coach, I'm very aware that there's many people who find the prospect of redundancy, being furloughed or having lost their job as an opportunity to really explore other options that are available to you out there. And importantly, finding a career direction that you're going to enjoy as much as is going to earn you that income that you need. So one option is self-employment, which is what we're going to be exploring today in more detail. So for those of you who are new to Stay Nimble, you're very, very welcome to join us today, and it's great to see you. If I could get the next slide, please, Lucy, thank you. Stay Nimble, for a little bit of background, is a social enterprise career development platform. And we are helping thousands of people across the UK to develop a better understanding of their personal strengths and skills. And really importantly, and it's one of the things we'll touch on today, those transferable skills that can be moved into different job roles and sectors. We have a huge number of assessments and resources online that are there to help you manage your career journey, and they will help you with things like preparing CV, job applications, search for jobs, and taking you through interview preparation and beyond into longer term goals. We also have a number of resources specifically looking at self-employment on there as well. This service is all offered with the backup of the ability to work on a one-to-one basis with one of our team of qualified and registered career coaches. And we're fortunate to have one of these career coaches with us today, Caroline Jones, who also may be familiar to some of you here today. But before we move on to our speakers, I'd just like to cover a few of the basic housekeeping rules for today's webinar. Thank you, Lucy. So as Lucy said, if you're not comfortable with your camera on, you don't need to have it on. It's perfectly fine for you to have the camera off if you're more comfortable with that. What I would ask though is if everybody could keep their mic on mute during the event. We'll be having presentations from both Caroline and Nick, and it'd just be great if they could do that without being interrupted. And as Lucy's also said, the chat box is there, so if you've got any questions at all that arise during the presentations, please pop them in there and we'll come to them at the end. Okay, a quick look at the agenda, Lucy, thank you. So in a moment, I'll ask Caroline and Nick to introduce themselves. And then we'll be hearing from Caroline first, Caroline has 21 years experience of being self-employed, so she's got a wealth of knowledge here, and she's going to be talking about some of the many, many things that you need to consider when contemplating working for yourself. That includes things like what to put in your business plan, the qualities and skills that you may need, and also how to refine the product or service that you're planning to offer. So we will then be hearing from Nick, who's a financial advisor and who works with self-employed individuals and small businesses. Nick will look at your motivation for going self-employed, but importantly also the financial implications and how to keep an eye on the income and those outgoings through an expenditure analysis. This will all be followed by your questions. So again, pop them into the chat bot and we will get to them at the end. So the next slide, please, Lucy. That's great, thank you. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Caroline and Nick have got to say and to learning a few things from them as well. So Caroline, can I please ask you, first of all, just to introduce yourself to everybody today?
Hello everybody, I'm Caroline Jones. I'm a career coach at Stay Nimble now. But previously to this, going a little way back, I went to university and studied business studies, but particularly specialised in self-employment. I got the opportunity to work on lots of different case studies, including things like gardening, bed and breakfast, cafes, a whole array of things. I then went into recruitment and worked for some big boys in recruitment, and then decided that I could do this myself. So I started from my bedroom and built my own recruitment business. I got to about $1 million turnover, and I had 5 permanent full-time staff working for me, and I had about 30 temps working for me. After 21 years, I decided that I'd achieved that goal and completed what I wanted to do there. So I retrained to become a career coach, and this is where I am now. Shall I pass you over to Nick?
Thanks very much, Caroline. Morning, everybody. I'm Nick. I'm a financial advisor at Leon & Co Financial Services. So the reason I've been asked to speak today is I work with individuals, so employees, but also self-employed people, business owners, to help discuss all aspects of financial planning. And I really help people to create a plan to help them through their lives. But one of the main things that I can help with is because our firm's linked to an accountancy practice, so we help a lot of business owners. And one of the things that will no doubt be touched upon during this is the different tax breaks business owners can get, different benefits that business owners and self-employed people can get. So hopefully, through myself and Caroline, we'll be able to help give an idea of the sort of things you might be able to consider if self-employment is something that you're thinking about.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. Thank you. Okay, so a quick note on what will be happening after the webinar. If we run out of time and we don't get to all the questions, we will give a written answer for those questions that we haven't had time to look at. Lucy has also prepared an ebook with various resources from this session that she will be distributing afterwards as well. And the session is also being recorded, so the full webinar will be available to listen to again as a resource on the Stay Nimble website after this session. We're also considering running a follow-up webinar about the next steps of going self-employed, such as looking at how to market yourself. So please do give us your feedback afterwards. It'd be great to hear from you, hear your thoughts, and also to think about you moving forward as well. So let's get going. Let's get some advice for starting your own business, and let's find out if it's your time to be your own boss. So Caroline, over to you.
Thank you. So Lucy, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So what I've put together here is some of the advantages of working for yourself. So some of the main things that I felt was that I could choose my own projects. So when I've worked for previous companies, I haven't been able to choose my own projects. I was very much focused on what they wanted. Well, when I ran my own business, I could choose sectors that particularly interested me or how I wanted to work. I could also create my own work-life balance. And I put in here in principle, because obviously if you've got a client who wants to talk to you at 5 o'clock every evening and you really want to work 9 till 2, then that can be a bit tricky. Also, I talk about gaining more experience from different types of projects. So you are your own person to go and look for the clients, look for the businesses that you would like to work with, or how you would like to create your business. You can also earn more money per hour, usually, as long as you are doing the hours. And that is the thing with being self-employed. You do need to be able to do the hours to make sure that you are covering that. And lastly, you can make your working environment. You can be in charge of kind of how that works for you. Can I have the next slide, Lucy? The disadvantages of working for yourself is that you're not PAYE. So you need to think about every time you sell your product or service that it needs to cover your own tax, your holiday, your sickness, your pension, and your costs. So this is like a really important part of when you're working out if self-employment's for you. Also, if your work dries up, it is really up to you to go and get that next bit of work. So obviously there's no redundancy payouts. It is in your hands to make it work. Also, one thing that maybe you've thought about, maybe you haven't, but that phone or that email, every time you get a new email or you get a new call, it could be a new client. So it's really important that you can always cover your phone, especially if it's going to be you, that, you know, if you pop out, have you got your phone with you? You know, leaving it at home and then missing that vital call, just too upsetting. Potential loss of social time. A lot of self-employment, a lot of people who are self-employed actually use this to their benefit, will actually choose to say, right, I'm going to work in the evening so that I can spend a bit more time with my children. And also lack of structure. This again, I've seen people really struggle with because they've actually used to working in quite a structured environment, and then when they're free to choose their own time, it's a bit trickier. So that they would be the disadvantages. But if I haven't put you off, new slide, Lucy, thanks. Then I feel like let's go for it. This is where I would say you really need to start to see if it's actually viable with a business plan. There's a really good template on Prince's Trust, which I'd recommend. It's totally free and you can work through this. But what I thought today was to use some of this to kind of talk through and get you kind of thinking and hopefully getting you excited about what you could do with your business. So first of all, you need some business goals. You need to think about what you want to achieve. And I personally would break these down into sort of a 1 year, 3 year, and then a longer term. And if it's your business, don't be scared to make these personal. If they are about the fact that you want to get your house, you want to be able to afford a car, you want to be able to afford a holiday, you want to look after your family, have those in those goals, but also have real business goals. So how are you going to get more clicks on your website so you're going to get more interest? How many people do you need to, or what do you need to sell, or what do you need to have delivered to be able to employ another person, so that actually your goals really make sense and actually are something for you to keep bouncing back to. The next bit that we're going to talk about in the next slide is all about you. So that will come. Products and services is really thinking about what your product is and why it's going to be unique, or that service is going to be unique to your market. You know, is it going to feel different? Is it going to be unique in its particular benefits? What is it that's going to make it stand out? Then we're going to look at market research and a bit on marketing, then on your competitors and why they're there, a little bit on cost and price and how much money can you make from this, is it actually viable, and lastly a backup plan. Can I have the next slide, Lucy? Thank you. So first of all, I think it's really important to think about yourself and what qualities and skills you really need to work for yourself. And I think being a little bit single-minded is quite helpful as a self-employed person. Being able to be self-disciplined, motivated, determined, but also resilient with what's happened in COVID, where people have had to rethink about their businesses, maybe had to diversify, maybe think a bit more outside the box. That is a lot of the time, not COVID obviously, but is quite normal when you're running your own business, that the market will change, new regulation comes in, you've got to think on your feet how you're going to change this or make this work for your business. Then the financial management. You do not need to be an accountant. I am by no means an accountant, but you do need to be able to look at, are you making a profit? There are some really brilliant tools out there now, like Xero, QuickBooks and Sage, where you can link it into your online bank, and then you can see on an hourly basis who's paying you, which invoices have gone, what you spent, so that you can make sure that you're keeping on top of your finances. Time management and forward thinking is my next thing. I think you can be the best entrepreneur in the world, but if you're not great at time management, it's something you need to be really careful of, because you can get really tied up in making beautiful logos and doing wonderful projects, but the productivity of your business is what's really important. And linked to that is that you're forward thinking, that you are thinking about what's going to change. What do I need to do in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, to make sure that I am still got the business that I need to generate, to earn the money, to be able to be self-employed. Then we go on to the sales and marketing. So with this, you have to blow your own trumpet. So you need to network, you need to go out and talk to people, you need to think all the time how you're going to market yourself, how you're going to keep yourself in the market so that people are hearing about you, knowing about you. And it doesn't have to be all one way. If anything, if you've got lots of different ways that you're marketing yourself, it's better. And lastly, know your market, know why you're going to be special, know why you're going to be unique. Can I have the next slide, Lucy? Thank you. So how can you fill the gaps? Because I've probably said some things there that maybe you think I don't quite know as much as maybe I need to, or maybe when you think of the product, you're kind of feeling a little bit scared of, oh, can I really do this? My first thing I would say to you is think about the gaps, think about the skills. So when I wanted to become a career coach, I needed to get a new qualification. So I needed to go and find out how I was going to do this. And this is exactly the same for you if you're then looking at setting your own business up. You need to be able to look, do I need a qualification? Do I need a certificate to be able to actually offer this service? Then you might feel that you actually need to get some some training. Maybe it's just small bits of training. Maybe it's just a little bit of a little course on time management, or you need to think, okay, how could I do some Google marketing or whatever that you think actually my business would need. So maybe look at some free training if you can get it, and also you know, what courses you might need to do. There is some brilliant free training out there at the moment on things like Open University and Read and other areas. If this business that you're creating is going to be new, really try and get some work experience or some volunteering experience in it, so that you can see if actually you like it. Because sometimes we can all have these wonderful dreams, but in reality, when you try it out, you don't like it as much as you thought, or you actually feel like, I've got a real buzz and I really want to do this. Also look at areas that you're going to be covering in your new venture. So are you going to need to do a lot of photography, say, because you're going to put a product on a website? Would it be helpful to enhance your photography skills? Little things like that that can just really make your business zing. Don't be scared to buy in services though. I mean, I'm no IT whiz kid. I couldn't network my computers. I couldn't set up my own CRM system. I needed to buy in those. So if you need to do that, that's what you need to do. Don't try and sit for months and build your own CRM system. Also, when you're thinking about employing staff, when you get to that point, what skills can they bring in that are different to yours? Because actually that helps diversify your team and make you the best team if you've got people that bring different skills to the party. I'd also say things like legal, accountancy, probably HR as well. Unless you're qualified, I would really use professionals so you don't get yourself stuck. And also keep an eye on the future. Look for what new tech products are coming along that might help you with your business grow. Next slide, Lucy, please. Thanks. So we've talked about you now. We're now going to talk about honing this product and making sure it's really ready for the market. So the first thing we're going to look at is sort of the research. Then we're going to quickly look at competition, and then we're going to look at doing a SWOT analysis. Can I have the next slide, Lucy? Thank you. So on your research, I would start off with doing some survey monkeys, or doing some sorts of surveys in COVID times, definitely online, maybe in some social media groups on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and ask basic questions about your product. Why would they be interested in it, and see what sort of response you get. This will really help you to identify, actually, is this a service or a product that people would be excited about. Then I would suggest you test it. So maybe do a small group where you can either send them the product or you give them an experience of the service. So it's like nearly an experiential chance for them to see if actually feeling it, tasting it, or experiencing it, would they like it? And then ask them stuff. I would then look at the product, the price, the place, and how it's being promoted, and ask questions about those to see if it's real and if somebody would really want to actually buy it. And actually one of the questions at the end would be, would you buy this? And then I would test it more. I would continue to test it. And actually, I believe with any business, you need to continuously grow it. So this needs to be something that you're regularly trying out with a new product, or where you're trying to diversify it. Next slide, please, Lucy. Thanks. Then you need to check out your competition, because if they're doing exactly what you're doing already, don't waste your time. But if they're not, then brilliant. What are they doing? So look at a main player. So who's the top dog in this business? Then who is kind of midfield, and then who is going to be your entry level competition? So you're kind of looking at all your competition of maybe where you want to go, and maybe, you know, where your dreams you want to be. I would then look at really pulling it apart. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What are the benefits? How do they market themselves? What is their price? And also, what is their weakness? What do you know more about, or what do you feel like is really going to make you stand out? So when you're selling your product to people, you know that you can stand out in the market. And again, I would say now, with the way that Facebook, Google Analytics and things like that, it's really easy to follow your competition and see what they're doing, and keep an eye of kind of what they're doing and how they're marketing themselves. Next slide, please, Lucy. And then once you've got this, you've really got a really good SWOT, because you can start to see where your strengths are in the market. So what is going to make you different? Then you can also look at their weaknesses, and your weaknesses. So what is it that actually you're going to need to maybe train on or need to be aware of that is going to be your area that maybe is going to let you down? What opportunities you see. So with COVID, it has also brought a lot of other opportunities to people that we might never have seen, but also what threats are going to come along. So is something going to change in law? Is something going to change in how things are happening that could affect your business? Next slide, Lucy, please. And then lastly, before I hand you over to Nick, is your financial implications of being freelance or self-employed. So from all what we've talked about today, it is really important that you really understand the finance of it and the break even. So how many hours or products do you need to sell to actually cover your costs? And that's not just your household costs, it's the cost of what you need to actually put this product to market. So the whole thing. I would, once you've been able to break this down, and Nick will obviously explain a bit more in detail about this, but once you've got this, then you can actually look at your pricing strategy, because you know how much your competitors selling it for, and how much, if you then put in a guide of how much you want to increase by promoting it and selling it, what your price strategy would be, and also kind of what your costs need to be, which will help you forecast, hopefully, when you can employ somebody or when you can then grow the business further. The next area that you really need to think about is, most of us need an accountant unless you are really, really good in that side. And I would say to you that you need to sort out how you're going to trade and what company formation you want to be. So are you going to be a sole trader? Are you going to go into it for partnership, or are you going to be limited? Limited has lots of benefits, that you've got limited liabilities, but is more expensive than setting yourself up as a sole trader. And obviously a partnership, you need to have two of you in there, but that would be something really important, because there's very different tax implications for all three of these. You also need to produce your yearly accounts. So do think, when you set yourself up, that you do need to do this, and make sure you're prepared for it. The worst thing you can do is leave it a year and then know that you've got a tax form come in and you've now suddenly got to pull this information together. VAT, if you're buying lots of things, then I would say it's probably good to register straight off for VAT, because then you haven't got that you're not having to pay the VAT on all the items. However, if you're maybe more of a service, then you might not need to go for VAT initially, because you only need to pay VAT once your turnover is 85,000. Now on to kind of just making sure you really understand, and I know lots of people where this has been a little bit difficult, where maybe they've been temping or contracting or freelancing for somebody, and they haven't checked their contract, and they're not actually sure if they are actually being paid by PAYE or self-employed. Really, really do check. It's really important. And then I would always have a plan B. When I set up my business, I had a 6 months reserve, so that if it didn't go right, I would then go and find myself another job, or diversify, or do something. I would really recommend this to you, that you have a plan of, right, I would try this, I would try that, and that is in your business plan right from the very start, that you think, right, if this doesn't work, what am I going to do? I really hope this has been really useful. I'm now going to pass you over to Nick, who's going to cover more of the financial side. And thank you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about, as Caroline said, some of the considerations you might have when deciding on setting up a business or going self-employed. So I'm sure you'll have done plenty of thinking to this point about why you might want to go self-employed. So as Caroline said, being your own boss, working from anywhere, potentially keeping the money you earn for yourself rather than giving it to somebody else. But there's plenty of financial considerations that I'd really urge you to think about before making the leap, whether it's just for peace of mind, whether it's to ensure you can still meet your essential outgoings, whether it's to calculate how many hours you might need to work part-time alongside going solo. These should all form part of your decision-making process. It's a really massive topic, so I'm going to trying to cover some of the things to consider within the 10 to 15 minutes or so that I'll be speaking. And none of this is direct financial advice, as everybody has a different situation, but I'm happy to help people on an individual basis too. So either way, Hopefully I'll give you something to think about and some useful tips to take away. Next slide, please. Thanks, Lucy. So whenever I work with a new client, whether they're struggling financially, whether they're doing all right, or whether they're on a couple of $100 a year, we always start in the same place, which is, what is your current position? So I know there's people here today from a wide mix of situations, some who might be unemployed, others in employment, but I'd still think about where you are today. For those unemployed, look at what your situation is and maybe think about what you might get in a job. For those in employment, I'd say look at your contract and what are you getting in all areas. It's very easy to just look at what your salary is and think that's it. But with most jobs, there's other valuable benefits. So just to go through a few of these. So salary, obviously there's the basic salary, but some people get overtime, bonuses, there's chance of promotions or salary increases depending on the company that you work for and the type of job you do. Holiday pay, you get so many days allowance each year to take and be paid for. And I know many self-employed people that genuinely say they can't remember the last time they took a holiday. So I'd say please factor this in because you really need to be taking holidays. You should be. So factor in the cost for that. The sick pay and maternity pay, again, these are valuable benefits. Some are just statutory government imposed figures, but a lot of companies will give significant increases to these. There's a pension that I'll just touch on. It's an incredibly valuable benefit. If you're 22 or over and you earn over 10 grand a year, legally you'll be automatically enrolled into a pension. And certainly if you earn less than this or you're younger, the company might still be obliged to pay into a pension or at least offer one. A common misconception that we come across a lot is that everybody gets a pension from the government when they get to retirement. But in reality, they give you about 9 grand a year if you've made national insurance contributions all through your lives. And a lot of people, or most people that I know, can't live off that amount. So pensions are really important to consider. Then there's life cover that's a very valuable benefit. It might come under contracts as something like death in service, but essentially it's usually a multiple of your salary. That means if you die while you're employed, they pay out a sum to your family that can assist with things like mortgage and expenses. Some companies will offer things like private medical cover and critical illness cover. And I know these aren't the nicest things to talk about, but they're all things to factor in that you might need going forwards. And then there's the other obvious things like laptop, phone, car allowance, exams and support going forwards. And I know Caroline mentioned, think about the qualifications, you might need to do something. If you work for somebody, they might pay for these, or you might need some experience going forwards. So would it be worth working for somebody, getting the exams, and then going off and doing your own thing afterwards? So just some things to consider. Clearly, some of the benefits you might get, and some of those that I've just spoken about, might not be essential to you. You might not get a phone, you might not get a laptop. But some of these things are really, really important. At 22, I didn't care that I was getting a pension, but I should have done. Now, certainly I do. But either way, go through, work out what's important, what you'd need going forward, what you miss going forward, and then you can put the two into a list. Ready now, thanks, Lucy. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, it's really important, whatever situation you're in, and however much you earn, to think about current position. And sometimes it's easy to forget and lose track of exactly what you spend your money on. So I've got a really exciting, lengthy Excel spreadsheet. It's not that exciting, but it's really useful, I promise you that. So this is just the first section. It's quite a long sheet, but if anybody wants a copy for yourself, I think just put a comment in the box or drop us a note at the end. I don't know if Lucy's going to send it out, so I'll have a chat with Lucy afterwards on the best way to get this, to circulate this to people. But it's really, really useful. I go through this with every single client. It helps us run through the individual sections of our lives. So the spreadsheet's really, really good, as we can look at quite a few different scenarios with it. So you can complete it with all your details at the moment, and it gives a great snapshot of where you are today. From it, you can then look at areas that you might have now, but not going forwards, pretty much like I discussed on the last slide. So there's sections like accountancy, life insurance, professional fees, things that you might not be paying for now, but you might need to pay for and factor in going forwards. You can then look at the difference between now and the future, what you might earn before and what you might earn afterwards. And then you can get a rough monetary figure on this. So if you're wanting to calculate what a before and after situation could look like, this is really good for that. And I know there's particular headers you can see here. These are ones that I might use for some of my clients. So just feel free to change any of the details on it. It'll still work out at the end to what you want. So it's pretty flexible. And then a couple of other situations that you could think of. So you might think of a worst case scenario. So what it might cost to live for, let's say, 1 year without any income coming in. So you could look at current financial position, look at how much per year you have in disposable surplus income, and then you could look at how long it might take to save for that 1 year of no money coming in as a worst case scenario. Or you could look at, if you've got so many current savings in your current account, so many savings in your current account, you might want to look at how long you'd be able to sustain setting up a business either on a reduced income or bringing nothing in. One last thing that I'd say on this, slightly off topic, but is if you've got a partner, make sure to fill it in with your partner and be really open and honest about the whole situation. Ask for their advice and support, not just at the start, but continuously. Try not to keep anything from them, even if you think it's for their own good. There's many times doing what I do as a financial planner where I feel like half of my role is a marriage counsellor, and many of these issues genuinely could have been avoided by just talking at the outset. But also, not just be honest with your partner, be honest with yourself. So things like the socializing aspect, I think these are on the next slide too. You probably won't be able to read them, but as a guide, if you're right to click through, yeah. So the things like eating out, takeaways, socializing, sports, hobbies, transport, how much you give to charity, put in the true figures for these, not just what you've spent over the last year, because clearly you won't have spent that much being in COVID times. Because no doubt when we're back to normal, these are going to increase significantly again. And if you're lying to yourself, you're going to massively underestimate costs. So be honest with your partner and with yourself. Thanks, Lucy. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is just a bit about what you might need to get up and running. So when you're looking at the plan for going self-employed and working your way through that exciting spreadsheet, then think of what costs there might be with setting up a business and really think of everything. So there's a lot here, so I'm only going to run through a couple. I've listed some obvious ones and some less obvious ones. And clearly, depending on the type of business that you are or the kind of clients that you're looking for, will determine where you want to focus on. I was chatting earlier with Lucy, Caroline and Jennifer, and we were talking even simple things like buying daffodils from Tesco's versus M&S. And it's the same with anything, and you get what you pay for. So you might want to skimp in certain areas. A computer might not be essential for what you're doing on day one. You might not be a high-end graphic designer, but you might think it's really important to get a really high quality logo and branding because you're trying to attract really high-end clients. So just focus on particular areas you want to really create the biggest impact on. So just picking a few out of these. So a website, as an example, is something that most businesses are going to have. And it'll completely depend on what you're wanting to do. Are you going to be selling a product? Are you going to be selling a service? Are you wanting to sell through a platform like eBay, Amazon, Etsy? Because if you do that, then the setup costs will be minimal, and then you'll probably pay a percentage of each sale instead. But if you're looking at setting up your own website, you could do it on your own. So you could use something like Squarespace or Wix. You might be looking in the region of £20 to £30 a month, or you could even buy a domain, your own hosting on something like one-on-one websites, and you could build your own WordPress site. And there's some great tutorials for websites and a lot of these other things on places like YouTube. So just go on YouTube, search for it, and you'll see great tutorials. Clearly at the higher end of the websites, you could pay somebody to develop it for you. And for a quality template site, you're probably talking £1,000 upwards. Again, make sure to incorporate things like the hosting, the security certificates, the domain. And then clearly, if you're wanting to do things like bespoke e-commerce websites, then the costs are going to be significantly higher than this. And then I'll pick marketing too, because I put 0 at the lower end, because you might be able to just get away with using social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, write your own blogs. But then if you're wanting to raise your profile further, you could look at adverts and employ people who are in marketing. Clearly, I've got clients that spend £500 a month on things like marketing, on ads. But when you bring in that amount of money in back from them, then it's clearly worth it. So with a lot of these things, just test them out, see how you go, and then put more money into them as you bring in more back from them. There's other things like a printer. I don't know if it still exists, but I got my first printer through a website called FreeCycle, where people just give away stuff that they don't want anymore. So have a look at websites like this, go on Facebook Marketplace. You can get secondhand things for absolutely nothing. And then when you need the expensive printer to print out quality proposals, then spend a bit more. So yeah, there's plenty more there that I won't go through. But I'm sure Google's a great source, or drop me a note and I'm happy to recommend certain things afterwards. So go back in, once you've gone through your assumed costs, and then put these back in the spreadsheet. So you can use the sheet to help with both one-off costs, but what I would definitely say too is what a lot of people forget is costs like a Zoom license, your mobile phone bill, your website hosting, stuff that costs you on a monthly basis. Annualize this and make sure to put this in too, because so many people just forget these little costs, but they all add up. So annualize these and multiply them by multiplying by 12 and then put them back in. And then there's a few graphs on the next slide. So again, you probably can't read these, which is fine, but essentially they're populated based on the data that you input. So it gives a really good visual indicator on things like surplus income, expenditure, and then what you actually spend your money on. Clearly there's no right or wrong answers, but if there's a really high proportion in socializing, so let's say the yellow here is socializing, and then you're looking at temporarily reducing costs or heavily saving, then it's a really good indicator to say that you might need to reduce your socializing costs a little bit temporarily and focus your saving in other areas. Thanks, Lucy. Okay, so the reason I put mortgages in here is because it's something that we so commonly get asked, and I think it's really important because a lot of people throughout the course of their life at some point want to get on the property ladder, and a mortgage is one of the biggest debts you'll ever have. So it's more tricky to get a mortgage, but it's something that most people do want. And to put it bluntly, if you run a business or if you're self-employed, it is often more difficult to get a mortgage. It's certainly not impossible, but often the criteria is more stringent, particularly at times like COVID times. So if you're thinking about buying a home, often lenders will need maybe two or more years of certified accounts and evidence of things like contracts. And then how much you can borrow is usually based on an average of earnings. So if you just started out and in your first year, you've got fairly low earnings, and then in year 2, you've got decent earnings, the chances are they'll still take year 1 into account. If you've already got a mortgage, then it could be less of a worry, but just consider that when it gets to the end of the fixed term period, you might need to go through another application to remortgage or get on a fixed rate. And if you can't, it might be that the standard variable is the rate that you go on and then payments go up. So if I could just give 4 quick tips on getting a mortgage or thinking about getting a mortgage when you're self-employed, is firstly, always speak to a mortgage broker. Because a mortgage broker works with different lenders on a daily basis, they know who has what criteria and how likely you are to get accepted. It'll save time, hassle, stress, money, and then you're less likely to get searches on your credit file. And I'll come to why that's important shortly. Secondly, pretty much what Caroline said too, about using professionals. Certainly when it comes to the mortgage side of things, I'd say always have an accountant do your accounts or prepare tax returns. Lenders will need to see evidence of earnings and then evidence of the tax that's been paid. And if these are well prepared and accurate, it looks much better. Always get your credit history in order. One of the other reasons I've just said about recommending using a broker is that whenever you get a hard search on your credit file, so if a company searches you to approve you for a loan or anything like that, it'll show up on your credit report. And if you're applying to loads of different companies and mortgage providers and you're getting rejected, they'll see this. So a mortgage broker can help give an idea of the criteria in advance, so it's only likely you'll be accepted with the person that they apply with. And then lastly, it might sound obvious, but don't bend the truth with lenders. If you miss out any facts when they ask you, they will probably decline the application instantly if they think there's any malice involved in it. So always tell the truth. Thanks, Lucy. Okay, and then just lastly, second to lastly, many people, when they go out a loan, they'll ask for financial help from the bank or via another route. And then when assessing you, lenders will often look at a number of factors. So some of these things you can't change. So economic climate, the amount of assets you've got, your income, nothing you can do about those, particularly if income's variable. But one thing you do have influence over is your credit rating. So to start with, I would recommend signing up to a service like, I don't know if you've heard of ClearScore, something like that. It's free and it gives you an idea of your credit score and it updates it every single month. So it helps tell you where to improve, even simple things like if your bank account's not been open that long, or making sure you're on the electoral register. It shows if there's any missed payments previously or glaringly obvious flaws in your financial history, because sometimes credit institutions, banks get it wrong. So if there's something that you can spot that was wrong, you can go back to the bank and query it, and it can improve your credit score there. Some of the paid for credit providers too, like Experian, they're really, really useful, and it only costs a couple of pounds. So if you've worked really well on something like ClearScore, I pay a couple of quid to get a report from Experian because it just gives everything in a bit more detail. So a couple of tips for improving credit score, but in general too, would be get rid of expensive or bad debt. It's a lot cheaper for you to have debt in better places. So loans from banks, for example, rather than on credit cards. Payday loans are the absolute worst thing you can possibly do because the interest rates are ridiculously high on them, but also they look terrible on your credit file. So if you've got payday loans, I'd suggest that they're the first ones to pay off. Prove the ability to make regular payments. It's really important to have credit on things like mobile phone, cars, credit cards, because you need to prove that you can pay back these things. So it's good having a credit card as long as you don't constantly spend it and overspend on it. And then with credit cards, don't use the full balance. So if you've got £3,000 of credit on your card, always keep spending a low amount on it instead, because it proves to the banks and the lenders that you can have a lot of credit and not make full use of them. And then, as I said before, use services like ClearScore because they're free and they're really, really useful. Next slide, please. Thanks. And then just lastly, something slightly more exciting to finish on. I know I've talked a lot of possibly things to worry about or be concerned about, but I'm just ensuring that you've got the proper plan in place to go forwards and then you don't need to look back. So with expansion, as part of the business plan, as Caroline said, you'll probably be modelling future years. And somewhere along the line, you'll be talking about future growth. Clearly, some people are more than happy on their own and only taking on the work that they can handle. So being a one-man band, and that is perfectly fine. If you're not, though, just think that taking somebody on might not be quite as straightforward, because obviously everything I mentioned at the start, that you're thinking of things that you might have to incorporate into your lives going forward if you're not employed. You have to provide a lot of those for people going forwards if you're taking on staff. But every single business that you can think of started somewhere. And clearly for these businesses, if you get it right, the rewards are massive. So as part of the plan and going forwards, just think, what capacity do you want to take on? Do you want to take just what you can, or do you want to grow beyond? If the latter, are you going to think about using subcontracting, outsourcing to others, or do you want to grow your own business and then accept the associated costs? So just lastly, as I mentioned, I'm not meaning to sound negative, because clearly the rewards are massive. You're your own boss, managing your own time, and it's, employment is not always the right route. I'm just suggesting make sure to create a plan. Use the spreadsheet, even if it looks boring and lengthy. It is brilliant. Like I said, I force every single one of my clients to go through that process. But whatever you decide to do, just make sure you're happy doing it, because I'm in financial services and I see all the time that money doesn't always equal happiness. So just make sure you're happy in doing what you want to do. And for anyone that's come today, I'm more than happy to have a 15-minute conversation at no cost, no obligation, no commitment, anything about personal financial situations. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn, drop me an email or give me a ring, and good luck.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, Nick and Caroline. That was really, really informative, and hopefully everyone has taken lots from that. If anyone has got a question, either you can unmute yourself and ask it directly, or if you want to pop it into the chat box, I am happy to read it out. I know, Jennifer, you had a couple of people email in before the webinar, so I don't know if you want to read those questions now.
Yeah, sure. Let's read it. First of all, thank you very much, both Caroline and Nick. That was fantastic. And Nick, it sounds like the spreadsheet might be really useful for everybody to do, not just those thinking of going self-employed. But I think it's something that I would actually choose to do as well.
It really is. And like I said, you can change all the columns too. So just because it gets sent out with something in a particular way, change it to the kind of thing you're thinking of doing, and it'll work for everyone.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. I look forward to receiving that. One of the the things that Caroline mentioned that I wanted to go back on, and it's relating back to a question that I received from a member I was working with last week, where we were talking about self-employment. And it was, when going self-employed, would you recommend joining a business association or a trade organisation in order to get more advice or to network in terms of meeting other people within the sectors? And what would the benefits be?
I would really recommend it. In both the businesses that I've been involved in both recruitment and in being a career coach, both times I have joined the associations that have linked, and each time I've got really massive benefits from it. Not only do you sometimes hear about business that actually you might be able to actually do and part of that, so sometimes there might be group projects or things that you can be paid on that you could be involved in, but also the training. A lot of the time there's a lot of free training that's offered, and if laws change and things like that, they will then come up with regulatory changes, maybe help you with changing your terms and conditions and things like that. But also it's just really good to keep your knowledge bank high, so anything where you can be getting it, and usually, if I'm honest, these organisations, it's not huge amounts of money to join. The actual value you get from it is much better than the actual amount that you've paid. So I hope that helps on that question.
Good. So it sounds like people are actually getting a lot of backup support and helping their motivation as well as that they're moving forward in their own business venture through business associations.
Exactly what you said, but also it's good from an accountability point of view, because you know, you've got other people in either similar situations or other people to continually help monitor what you're doing and give advice. So it's not just the benefits, the direct benefits from it, but it can keep you accountable too, which is always useful.
Good, thank you, Nick. Thank you. Another thing, which Nick, I'll stay with yourself on this one, and again, it's another member has asked me with regard to the accountant's side of things. I think a lot of people feel that having an accountant is quite a big expense initially when they're starting out. Would you recommend still biting the bullet and having that accountant from the start, or would you recommend somebody do something like a bookkeeping course in order to try to get started and then maybe get an accountant later? What would
sorry, go on. I was going to say, I think I can understand people wanting to do it themselves, certainly, because I know everything's an expense when you're starting from zero effectively. But things like, if you're going to be doing a bookkeeping course, as an example, whilst it could be fairly useful, is firstly, you've got the cost to incorporate from that, but secondly, the time element. And if that time would be better spent on working on your business or setting up your own business or something like that, then it's probably better spent doing that. From the cost from an accountant point of view, if it's just somebody doing your year-end accounts, as an example, it might only be a couple of £100, and you'll find that accountants are great for knowledge, advice, tips. You'll get far more than your £200 if you go to a good accountant. And if you get somebody who works with small businesses, chances are they'll be able to grow with you as you grow, and they'll be able to advise going forwards. So personally, I would say probably bite the bullet. And as long as you can find a good accountant and somebody who understands you, your business, and what you want to achieve, I'd definitely go down that route, because the time you'd spend doing it, I'd like to think you'd be able to earn more than £200 definitely doing that.
Yeah, so it sounds like it might be money worth spent, plus the accountant might be able to save you money long term as well.
And certainly, as I mentioned, with credit files, mortgages, getting loans, is a lot of these financial services that you might want going forwards will often need evidence of what you've done. And if you've got a qualified accountant preparing all your accounts, it looks far better on you going forwards too.
Good, okay.
I would just also put in there that also they can tell you about the tax side of things as well. So even if you did like a bookkeeping course, you might not be an expert on all the tax regulations. And I would think that, and especially as they change every year, I think that's something that it is definitely worth having someone looking over your accounts.
Great, thank you. Lucy, did we have a question there from Mel?
We do. We've just got one from Rachel first, so we'll just cover that first. Rachel has asked, is there anything else you should consider if you want to set up as a social enterprise? So I don't know who has got any kind of experience in terms of social enterprises, or is that one to come back to it?
For me, possibly want to come back to, so if you're setting up a social enterprise, the idea is you're still running everything as a business, just putting the money back into the company and good things effectively. So I'm not sure from my point of view. Again, that's possibly one for. I think there's a few questions that would be say you're probably better talking to an accountant on these kind of things, but they would probably be able to advise on things like tax breaks and benefits that you'd be able to come by.
Yeah, that's fine. I think Rachel, if we'll maybe come back with a bit of information for you, because obviously Stay Nimble is a social enterprise itself, so it might be that we can get you some information there as well. Great. And then Mel has asked, she said, "Hi Nick, do you advise registering your sole trade company to HMRC even when you know it will not earn money in the next coming months? I am aware taxes are payable on profits."
Again, these are ones that I'm afraid I would have to say you're probably better chatting to an accountant on than somebody like myself, because I work with the individuals and the businesses on once they've been set up. I don't advise on the actual business setup in the first place, unfortunately. But I don't know if Caroline knows, is a specialist on something like this.
I'm not a specialist, but I would say on both of those areas, they are why you have an accountant, definitely, because on the social enterprise, they will know the tax implications of what you can do. And also with being a sole trader, if you're not making any money at all, then you probably don't need to register. But I would just get that clarified personally, just so that you felt comfortable. The other thing is if you're not making any money and you're spending money, then you might need to look at that just from an accountant's point of view in what the plan is and what you're doing. So I would definitely say they are really brilliant questions for an accountant to run through.
Yeah, just to add, there's various things with, for example, if you don't use an accountant, you might be making certain losses. But if you use an accountant, they're really good at seeing where you can offset losses in future against profits, as an example. So depending on what you're doing and purchases you make, accountants, I think it goes back to one of the questions Jennifer asked earlier. Accountants, you often find that by having an accountant, it pays for them and more with things and savings that you can make. So I'd certainly recommend speaking to one, and there's plenty that all of us know. So we'd be happy to put you in touch.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick and Caroline. So Amos has asked a question about saying he registered as an LLP, a limited liability company, but then decided to go back to work self-employed. He's put, "Am I breaking the law?" I think he's just asking if what he's doing is right. But I think with those sorts of things, as long as you're kind of declaring everything, and as the other guys have said, working with an accountant, I think as long as you're being very transparent with what you're doing to HMRC, then you're good. But if either of you have got a feedback on that, I'd say talk to an accountant and make sure HMRC know what you're doing. That would be my advice. Yeah, nodding, good, great. And Mel has just replied again saying, paying an accountant while you just start as a sole trader can be challenging. Caroline, have you got any advice from when you first started out in terms of kind of finding those costs for things like that?
I think the thing is everything that you do is the accountancy and the legal side, I think, are the most important bits that you find your money for. I think because it means you can sleep at night personally, and I think I understand it's challenging, I really do. The thing is though, is as I think Nick mentioned and Lucy has, with regards to some accountancy now, you can go and find accountants that actually work on contract and will do it, and they will say we'll do your year-end accounts for £200 or whatever, and it's a set fee. So I think if you can find an accountant like that, I personally would really recommend, especially when you're really starting up, because it's not like that you're going to have a really complicated situation. So I'm thinking I would shop around and find the best accountant. In the old days, there was something called Business Link that you could then go to, and they would kind of give you advice and things like that. I don't think there's anything really like that anymore that's a national. On a local basis though, there's quite a few, like I live in, or I used to be connected with Decorum Council in Hertfordshire, and you could actually get free advice from people there. So it might be worth looking around and speaking to your Citizens Advice Bureau or speaking to your local council and seeing if there's someone that can give you some general advice.
Yeah, I just second that. And there's, if you go on the Gov website, there's quite often local business advisors and support, and then grants for small businesses, depending on where you're on the process. It's difficult to advise specifically on those because it is different in different areas. But certainly if you do a bit of research in the local area on what grants might be available, then there's often support available for new startups.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, gosh, that's been a quick hour. We've run out of time, folks. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I'm hoping that everybody has gained a few hints and tips about what to consider before going self-employed, and also a few of the initial steps that you should be taking in preparation for that. As we said at the start, we'd love to hear your feedback. Please let us know if you'd be interested in a follow-up session looking at next steps and how to market yourself, the next steps, which would also come into the financial planning side of things as well, how to do that. As mentioned earlier, Lucy has prepared an ebook with useful resources, and from today's session, which will be distributed, and you can also see the webinar again if you'd like to refer back to it. If there's been important points you'd just like to hear the conversation again, it will be a resource on the Stay Nimble platform as well. All that's left for me to say is thank you. As ever, continue to stay safe. Remember that our career coaches are here to help and support you as and when you need, and we will look forward to seeing everybody again soon. So thank you very much for joining today.